In the USSR, there was a system of punitive psychiatry. People who criticized the authorities were declared insane and sent to mental hospitals. Officially, the authorities said they were helping these people, but in reality, they were breaking their fates. The first cases of such repressions appeared under Stalin. In the 30s, enemies of the regime were sent to camps or shot. But there were also those who were recognized as mentally ill. For example, if a person said that everything was bad in the USSR, it was considered abnormal thinking. Back then, such cases were isolated, but the method itself was remembered. Everything changed in the 60s when punitive psychiatry became a system. Under Khrushchev and Brezhnev, a new generation of people appeared in the country who were not afraid to speak the truth. Writers, scientists, workers. They opposed censorship and criticized the authorities. It was inconvenient to arrest them openly. It could cause a scandal abroad. Then another method appeared to declare them mentally ill. A special diagnosis was invented, sluggish schizophrenia. It meant that the person seemed to be not violent, but in his head are ripening dangerous ideas. This diagnosis was given to those who disagreed with the party line. In 1969, scientist Zhoris Medvedev wrote a book about the problems of Soviet genetics. The authorities could not just put him in jail because he was not a criminal. Then he was recognized as mentally ill and forcibly sent for treatment to a psychiatric hospital in Kaluga. No trial, no scandal. The newspapers didn't say that a dissident had been arrested, just that a sick man had been sent for treatment. People stopped believing the victim. After the asylum, a person could say anything. He was considered abnormal. It worked in an intimidating way. No one wanted to be among the abnormal. So many people shut up. Another example is Pyotr Grigorenko, a Soviet general who fought in World War II and received high honors. But in the 60s, he began to openly criticize the authorities. He was in favor of democracy and demanded the abolition of censorship. The authorities couldn't just lock up a war hero, it would look strange. Then the KGB found another way out, to declare him insane. In 1964, he was arrested and sent to a mental hospital where he was treated with potent drugs. He spent a total of 5 years in the asylum, although no doctor could prove that he was really sick. And in 1977, he was stripped of his Soviet citizenship while he was abroad so that he could not return. 10 years later, he passed away in New York. And already under Yeltsin, Pyotr Grigorievich was posthumously restored to the rank of Major General. In the 70s, in the USSR, there were at least 30 special mental hospitals where dissidents were sent. Some people were kept in the hospitals for decades, forced to take dangerous, mind-destroying drugs. One could end up in a Soviet mental hospital not only for politics. Sometimes a few careless words or even a lifestyle that seemed suspicious to the authorities were enough.
我并不想让我的内心充满仇恨，可是我实在不能理解他们为什么一定要对我这样，他们为什么一定要用如此残酷的手段来对待我。
I'm investigating rumors that protesters in China are being locked up in psychiatric hospitals by police.
后发生的事情就让我感到特别的害怕了。他们同样是把我五花大绑的绑在床上。
I've been told that they're given antipsychotic drugs.
You shared with me that you were forced to take medication for your supposed mental illness. Do you have any proof of the medication?
Yes, it's here.
It looks like a lot of medication.
这个吃了就是你精神就可以就混乱。
I'm trying to understand why doctors would work with police to hospitalize someone for speaking out against the authorities.
然后他们就是说我寻衅滋事了。
I'm working with an underground network to uncover a story that China's censors are trying to hide.
其实进医院你还是很瘆得慌，你知道吗？ A4 的那个纸上就是写着精神病院。
This abuse of psychiatric detention is illegal in China. I'm trying to find out why it's still happening.
这几年又滥用精神病收治的个案又多了很多。
Once diagnosed, victims are vulnerable to police intimidation for the rest of their lives.
To tell the truth, I was quite frightened about this, and I planned maybe I should leave China as soon as possible.
My name is Nima. I'm a journalist and filmmaker. In summer 2024, I was contacted by someone I'd met in Shanghai. I'm calling him K to protect his identity.
Hello, do you have the contact information of reporters outside of China? I need it urgently.
K told me a story I'd not heard before, a clue to what happened to those who criticized China's COVID lockdown.
我在疫情刚爆发的时候说出正确的话。我说防疫措施侵犯人的基本权益，使人不能就医吃饭。警察来把我抓走，我被警察用猪笼车送到精神病院去折磨，然后他们就说我有心理问题，关押我。
Wow. I was skeptical of what Kay told me. This was somebody that contacted me out of the blue, told me a very extreme, outlandish story. We did speak every day though for a month, and then all of a sudden he went offline.
I lived in Shanghai for almost a decade, so I was shocked to see my old street, Wulamuchi Road, become the center of Shanghai's anti-lockdown protests. Tensions boiled over after months of strict lockdowns. One of my friends was even padlocked into their apartment. People had had enough of being locked up in their homes or being sent to quarantine centres. They held up blank pieces of paper in defiance of strict censorship rules. It was the first time I had seen or heard people in China openly criticizing the authorities in this way.
The Chinese authorities have begun cracking down on anti-government protests which have spread to cities across the country.
The police started making arrests. I tried contacting people on the ground, but they were too scared to talk. Two years on, I found a Twitter thread from a white paper protester who had recently fled China. Like Kay, he also claimed he'd been sent to a psychiatric hospital, and he was now posting videos of his calls with police showing how he was still being intimidated.
喂，你好。喂。你们究竟把我的家人怎么了？威胁一个啊，威胁恐吓一个刚刚逃出中国的在新西兰的学生，是不是啊？去威胁恐吓他的家人，那个都没可能的呀。
I've just been getting ready to get on my flight to New Zealand to meet Junjie, speak to him in person and find out more. On my way to the airport. It's a 15-hour flight until I get to Junjie in Dunedin. 你好。
你好。
Can I come in?
Yes, please.
Thank you.
At that time, I was so angry. COVID-19 hurt people a lot, and we hope that Xi Jinping he could stop the harmful policing. So I plan to protest next day morning, maybe 8 o'clock. I went to stand in front of the teaching building, but only then for 5 minutes. Because some professors and some workers in the university, they noticed me and they forced me to a meeting room. The university asked my father to bring me back to my hometown.
How was it when you first saw your father? Was he angry with you? What did he say to you?
He asked me, Zhenjie, why did you do these things? What would happen to you and our family? After we went back home, my father, he just called the police and he asked me to hand him my phone, my iPad and my laptop. December 1st morning, my father, he was talking to someone on the phone and I saw a black car. And there was 2 men. They forced me to get in the car.
And then what happened?
They sent me to the mental hospital. And the doctors told me that I was in a very serious mental disease. I have to stay here for the treatment. Then they tied me on a bed. I tried to, and sorry,
It's okay.
I can't explain it.
Do you want to say it in Mandarin or you don't want to say it at all?
他们说你在精神分裂症。每次想到这个事情，那种恐惧感就是你真的想不到，说随随便便可以说，因为你对政府有意见，你对共产党有意见，你就是有精神病。因为不只是你，包括那些护士、医生，他们反复的在跟我强调，就是你就是因为对党有意见，对政府有意见，所以你就有精神病。我觉得真的很恐怖，很恐怖。我真的从没想过这些事情会发生在我身上。我感受到就是，而且我有时候我真的不知道如何用语言去形容。
Junjie's medical records show he was hospitalized for 2 weeks and prescribed antipsychotic drugs. What do you think your parents thought about this diagnosis? Do you think they agreed?
Even till today, I still didn't know their real thoughts. Yeah. I think my father, he was forced by policemen because he is a member of CCP and he works for the government, so he had to make a choice.
Just wrapped on our first day shoot with Junjie, and it was really tough. It was really emotional for him to have to go back through that period of his life. And I wonder how many other people, protesters, experience the same type of treatment and detention in psychiatric units that Junjie faced.
We're just on our way to pick up Junjie. I think it's really hard for him to drag up these memories. So today we're going to get a change of scenery and drive out to the world's southernmost stupa. My dad's Tibetan, and Junjie told me that a few years before his detention he had become Tibetan Buddhist and that his faith really helped him during his ordeal. So I want to ask him more about that.
It's about several years ago. I have some Tibetan friends. He was studying in Beijing, and he introduced a Tibetan temple to me. Yeah.
Wow.
Then I remember every morning I just pray for Tsongkhapa Lama.
How did that help you?
It make me calm down.
Talking about his experience is still a sensitive subject for Junjie. How was your mental health at that time? Do you understand?
Sorry. I don't have any mental disease, okay. They forced me to take medicine, and they beat me, they tied me on the bed, and they hurt me a lot.
It's totally valid to be angry. I mean, that was my point.
So sorry for this. It's my fault, sorry.
Junjie, it's not your fault.
You know, sometimes I think most foreign people, they can't understand what's happening in China. If you enter government, you are in mental disease. It was stated by the policemen, doctors or nurses. They just follow the rules made by policemen.
The doctor told you that in the hospital, that
Yes.
It wasn't them that diagnosed?
In fact, at first, they never did any check on me. Just think, because you entered the government, so you have mental disease.
They've just had a conversation with you about your political views?
They made a conclusion. Could you understand that?
Yes, yeah, they'd already decided. And the questions, were they about politics?
Some about politics. They just wanted to make me say something strange so that they can prove that I was in mental disease.
It was great to meet Junjie in person, but I think this trip has left me with more questions than answers. Why did this happen to Junjie and Kate? And how widespread is this practice? Recently, Chinese social media started buzzing with a new story. A woman called Li Yishui claimed she was detained in a psychiatric hospital after she accused a police officer of sexual harassment.
你跟他说你没有病，他说这里的人都说自己没有病。你跟他说你不想吃药，他给你从鼻孔灌到胃里边。你跟他说要不你弄死我得了吧，他说你这是抑郁症又加重了，我给你做电击治疗吧。
Her story has received 120 million views. She had also disappeared. What's going on? Getting information out of China is difficult, but I did find some clues in old news reports from 15 years ago.
被非法收治在精神病院长达4年。
One sensational story shows how a woman was hospitalized by her mother after an argument over money.
不久前，一个特殊的帖子在网络上流传，确切地说，这是一封来自精神病院的求救信。
我被关押在南通市第4人民医院，医生逼我吃2种以上的精神病药物，吃得我正常人感到全身酥软。
In a system with no oversight, almost anyone could remove problem people by detaining them in a psychiatric hospital. The media even came up with a name for it, 被精神病, or being mentally ill.
年被精神病的事件是屡有发生。那所谓的被精神病指的就是那些不应该被送到精神病院去，却被单位或者是家属强制的送进了精神病院。
To stop this abuse, China introduced legislation to protect patients' rights in 2012. The new regulations meant that people could only be forcibly detained for treatment if they were a risk to themselves or others. To police how effectively the new law worked, a group of citizen journalists called Civil Rights and Livelihood Watch documented ongoing abuses. Between 2013 and 2017, more than 200 people reported that they had been wrongfully hospitalized by the authorities.
我因为反映房屋合同侵权一案，多次把我送进黑监狱，送进劳教所，把我送进了郑州第8精神病院。这次精神病院鉴定是我偏执型，他们根本不把我当成人，随便随意的侮辱我。
Some activists risked filming in hospitals. They were investigating the disappearance of a veteran democracy activist called Song Zaimin.
宋在明他属于一个政治犯，对我们当时是去了，他那个医院在北京郊区是非常的偏僻的。其实进医院你还是很瘆得慌，你知道吗？
They searched the building for the psychiatric ward.
走上楼去，他就贴了一张，你知道那个 A4 的那个纸，A4 的那个纸上就是写着精神病院，就是这种东西，一看它就不是正规的精神病医院。
They knocked on the door.
就是敲门，然后那个门开了。
But the nurses told them visiting hours were over.
我们这儿周日早上。
平时不让看是吗？
Song Zai-min, the activist they were looking for, suddenly appeared at the door.
宋在明正好去上厕所出来，正好路过那个门口，听见有人喊他。3个人就往里面拉那个门，我们就外面2个人拉着，就对抗嘛。我们边对抗边交流，就这样。
The activists accused the staff of breaking the law.
如果你们不要这样的话，这是你们是医院的违法地点，你们医院在犯法，你们知道吗？对，你们是犯法，你们知道吗？现在给你用药，你们知道吗？
那个门就嘣就关上了，就这样就结束了。然后我们赶紧就出来，就打车，就往北京市里面跑。就是你采访的素材，还是想提前传送出来嘛？就是大概也就是我们这个报道之后10来天，半个月，然后宋在明就出来了。
Following his release, they interviewed Song to find out why he was detained.
他们公安来的，说我怎么着发那个帖子，微信里边，召集同城聚会啊，或者说是创造民主中国呀，就跟那鸟似的在笼子里关着。精神病迫害应该是他们最近一段时间常用的手段了，因为这个比较方便，不需要任何法律手续，也不需要律师，也不需要家属，也不需要你认罪什么的，什么也不用，我应该是自由人。他没有权利限制我，依照精神卫生法，他是自愿住院治疗。就是如果你要是有病的话，还是自愿住院治疗的，何况我这没病呢，我也不需要他治疗。
In 2024, Song Zai-min was hospitalized for the 5th time. His hospital records detail why. The patient once again made false statements on the internet, criticized the Communist Party, shouted slogans and organized illegal meetings. He was admitted to our hospital for involuntary treatment. China's mental health law was meant to have cleaned up the system. The mental health law states that it's a violation to treat somebody who's not unwell. It doesn't seem to have worked. I found a new case. Hospitalized last year, now trying to hold the police accountable through the courts. To protect his identity, we have used artificial intelligence to change his face and voice. We're calling him Lee, not his real name.
朋友们大家好，今天我收到了人民法院一次性告知书。我的诉讼请求第一项就是关于我被公安局非法鉴定精神病以及非法关押精神病医院45天的事情。
Lee is already monitored by the authorities. Meeting him in China is too risky, so we arranged to meet in Hong Kong.
到香港去的回来的过程，我都担心随时会被他们以各种各样的理由进行扣留。哎呀，这到顺着下起大雨来了，也是个麻烦。没带雨伞，也没有带抗救的衣服。
Police place people they think could disturb public order under digital surveillance. If Lee is on their watch list, just booking a train ticket could alert the police.
正在过深圳东的火车站闸口，7号线到上沙下车，这样才可以去罢免签证。我已经赶到了福建区公安分局出境那位通信，那就可以在机器上面进行签证。这样已经是香港的地铁站。
But even in the relative safety of Hong Kong, there are risks. New laws have made it a hostile place for journalists, so we arranged to meet away from the security cameras. Lee got into trouble when he attended a vigil for the former Premier Li Keqiang. A popular politician, who until recently was the second most powerful man in the Chinese Communist Party. His sudden death in November 2023 triggered an outpouring of grief across China.
现场的人是非常多，话也非常的多，整个的气氛总体来说是感觉是比较悲痛的。
Li took the opportunity to protest. He had prepared a sign criticizing the local police.
What happened when you held up your piece of paper?
我白纸一举起来的时候，立马就有人开始控制我的两个胳膊了。场景还是比较混乱的。
And then what happened next?
那天晚上审问了很久，但是给我做笔录也没有任何违法行为，所以他们就没办法把我弄去行政拘留，所以他们直接的送进那个精神病院了。他们的车开到那个精神病院门口的时候，我就明白了。那个时候是感到非常非常的惊讶。我还问了我们那个就是带头的审问我的派出所所长，我说你们是不是经常干这样的事情？他没有回答。
你进去精神病院的时候，你感觉怎么样？
第一时间感觉到是非常恐惧的。他们同样是把我五花大绑的绑在床上，手脚全部固定在病床上的。我医生立马就想起来要求公安提供一个就是合法的手续，就是入院手续，意思就是要求家属要签字的。
你的爸爸为什么签字？
他说是警察到我家里去之后，直接把他从床上拉过去的。就是强制性必须要去公安局，因为我父亲认知很低，他本身不认识字。然后呢，还有一点就是他是非常听那个公安跟政府的话的。
How did you eventually get out of the psychiatric detention unit?
我的主治医生第二天跟我面对面沟通之后，他就直接说，他说我认为你没有任何疾病，他说你可以回去了，通知你的签字的人过来签字就可以走人。但是医生他同时也通知了公安。所以呢，我父母想过来签字也签不成，因为公安非是盯着他不允许签字，所以就没办法出得去。
Li was detained for 45 days. He worries that the diagnosis he was given will affect his prospects, giving the authorities an unfair power over him that they can exercise whenever they want.
Why have you decided to take the police to court?
如果我不起诉警察的话，等于我默认了精神病，这个对我未来的生活会产生很大的影响，包括人身自由。因为警察他可以随时以这个理由，随时把我无条件的关进去。自己的权利都不敢争取的话，那感觉就类似于行尸走肉了。
Li is fighting his own case because there has been a crackdown on human rights lawyers in China.
各位好。
However, Huang Shuitao, a lawyer involved in drafting China's mental health law and famous for standing up for patients' rights, agreed to give Li advice.
你告公安有什么？
他公安把我送进去，公安不给我出来，都是他违法犯罪。
你怎么知道？
构陷吗？
他送你进去有没有书面证据？
有。
那这个医院有给你做这个诊断吗？结论是什么？
结论是好像是双向情感障碍。
有这么严重？
哎，他想问我什么都可以，这我能理解的。
没任何手续吗？
对呀，没有手续嘛，对呀。
有了全国的精神卫生法之后，那这种行为就不合法了。
对。
所以现在要挑战他，其实是他们是有法律风险。我只能这么说，打不打得赢另外说。
是，
但是它的违法性就明摆在那儿了。他们只会对一些弱者下手，对真正的强者他们也不敢下手。
I wanted to know why the police needed relatives, like Li's father, to sign his hospital admission papers.
这种情况我遇到挺多的，我相信这是警察为了回避自己的责任，又想掌权。
The police seem to be using this system to detain protesters without needing evidence.
在很多的个案里边，我直接把那个签字的人列为民事案件的被告，那他可能是为了避免这个直接署名的法律风险，所以就强迫家人去签字。
Have you seen it being used often for people who are protesting or writing comments online?
有发生，这种行为以前很常见，是因为把扰乱公共秩序的都可以把他送进精神病医院，以前是合法的，甚至是在精神卫生法的这个立法草稿里边的，就是作为合法的收治条件，我们是特意把它删除了，因为我们觉得扰乱公共秩序的这个条款是特别容易被滥用。那自从有了这个精神卫生法之后，这种情况其实是有法律风险的。
With almost no oversight, Lawyer Huang believes that this abuse is getting worse.
这几年又可能也是因为民间力量的这个衰弱，滥用精神病收治的个案又多了很多。不仅仅是警察，我觉得稍微有一点权力的人都可以滥用。
Lee wants to stop the police using his medical record as a reason to hospitalize him again. So while in Hong Kong, he plans to get an independent psychiatric assessment.
现在在准备来去那个精神心理科医生，跟他们对一下话，确认到底我有没有精神病。既开心又感觉到很悲哀，一个正常的人却不得不到处找医生，证明自己没有精神病。他有过很多的履历与头衔，应该很专业。
I met Lee following the appointment to see how it went. 精神病评估的结果是什么？
医生跟我说，他说我只能对你今天的状态进行评估，你没有任何问题。
现在你感觉怎么样？你如释重负吗？
总体来说肯定会稍微开心一些，但谈不上如释重负，因为未来的路会变成什么样子，我都不是很清楚的。说不定他们会随时以任何其他的名义把我再弄进去，是很难说的。
I'm on my way back to Singapore and a little bit overwhelmed actually after this trip. You know, it's emotionally draining to speak to people who are, you know, still going through the suffering, the fallout from that, and it also just makes me think about what could be happening to Kay. It's been 6 weeks now since I've heard from him, and yeah, I would really just like to get an understanding of what's going on.
Back home, I find a lead. China has guidelines on managing mentally unwell people who disturb public order, referred to as troublemakers in official documents. For patients posing a serious risk to public security, if the family do not cooperate, the emergency team should try to persuade them.
Do a good job of persuading the patient's relatives to send the patient to hospital. Now, I've heard this type of situation from Lee and from Junjie, but now I've seen it written in this official document. It feels like the police are trying to sidestep the courts, which means there's no effective oversight or accountability.
I want to know more about what happens to the activists in these psychiatric units. Many survivors claim they were subjected to electroshock therapy. Activist Jelly Jen said it happened to him. He now lives in Los Angeles and in his spare time organizes demonstrations highlighting China's human rights abuses.
我们今天做一场活动，是关于这个中国政府精神病医院迫害这个人权异议人士。我们现在先去那个我们一个放一些活动的一些物料的一个仓库，和其他的一些义工，我们先集合， 准备完毕，我们就去人流量最大的一个地方——洛杉矶好莱坞那个星光大道，做一个活动，关于是声援这个中国政府被精神病迫害的一些受害者，都做一个展示。活动信息、各种流程全在里面。
Jia claims that his activism makes him a target.
这段时间就是他们对我的威胁，这种恐吓还是蛮频繁、蛮多的。所以说，我包括今天就是准备了很多一些保护自己的一些装备，
也包括防弹衣啊、警用摄像记录仪啊，还有各种电棒啊、电警棍啊。
那么本身受害者、幸存者，我能侥幸出了一种责任，来帮他们。那么还有那么多人关在里面，在精神病医院里面，你永远没有希望。这种行为上这么一种展示吧，它比纸质这些资料更容易让观众了解这个事件的这个残酷性，这是我们要做的。那么这也是给中国政府当局一个施压一种方式。
She was arrested by Chinese national security agents. Then she was locked in a mental hospital.
Jia told us that in July 2018, he took part in factory worker protests.
没有工资，我们怎么养活我们的家人和小孩？我们就想加一点工资，老板还要说我们是闹事，我们加点工资有什么错？没错，没错，没错。
He claims he was interrogated by police for 3 days, then taken to a psychiatric hospital.
那个时候是我当时跟国保还有他们交接的医务人员嘛，走的是那种货体。我一看这铁门，我就感觉这就是肯定是管辖室，因为它跟不同于其他那种病房嘛，就非常挺戒备森严的。进入去以后，国保当时是说的是说，这个人很危险啊，你们最好是加强这个给他管理啊，先把我固定在床上给我先绑起来了。我其实确实是很害怕，他有时候他是很紧很紧的，你想稍微活动一下身体，你都很难去活动。然后后面那个护士过来嘛，他说你这个什么病你知道吧？我就说没什么病。他说你还没生病啊？你在这边都说没有病，小推车嘛，推过来，他那个药，盖儿一个盖儿的，然后就是倒上这种药丸，应该是3种药，给我吃完。这个吃了就是你精神就可以就混乱，反正就是没有更多力气了。
Jia told us that after a week in the hospital, he refused to take any more drugs and fought with hospital staff. He was told he was causing trouble and sent for electroconvulsive therapy.
看着各种固定，他们就是给我把头部，它是2个那种的电流那种仪器戴上，我记得他擦了他东西吧，戴上他全部都完事以后，你再闹，再，然后就这一电。这我就那痛苦感真的是从头到脚，整个身体不是自己的，那疼的这真的是，他电一下然后停一下，电一下停一下，我都昏死过好几次，就是整个就会感觉像昏死过去一样。
ECT is an internationally accepted treatment for a small number of mental illnesses. However, studies from China show that rates of ECT use are many times higher than other parts of the world. In 2019, China introduced new measures to limit its use, stating that it should only be administered with consent and under general anesthetic. Jia told us he was discharged after 52 days. He fled China without his medical records, so we haven't been able to verify his account.
是地狱走了一圈，在里面关押，你不知道什么时候能释放你，他没有一个期限，有可能1个月，也可能是10年，甚至是一辈子。
months after being released from hospital, Junjae protested again. This time with fireworks. Months after COVID, tensions were still running high, and people were angry about a ban on fireworks over Chinese New Year.
I just recorded a video and someone else posted on the social media. It's the Chinese New Year. I was arrested again.
Junjae was charged with picking quarrels and troublemaking, the catch-all crime used to silence criticism. He was forcibly hospitalized again.
During the 2 months, the policemen, they come to see me several times. And they asked me to sign on some fields. Yeah.
And what was that for?
They didn't allow me to read it. I just saw the title. In China, we call it 寻衅滋事. It's like a troublemaker. Sorry, I think it's better for me to speak in Mandarin.
Yes, please.
这些文件后来也是被我父亲拿走了，我父亲也拒绝向我展示这些。Finally, the doctor, he said that the policeman told him that I can leave the hospital.
So they just let you go?
Yeah.
Did they give you medicines to take?
Yes. And sometimes they even would go to my home to check it.
How often did they go to your home?
At first, almost every week. But sometimes they didn't go to see me, but maybe just only see my father or just call my father to check it.
Community mental health services in China provide follow-up care for people living with mental illness. However, there is a heavy emphasis on control. They call it maintaining social harmony, with health workers and police closely monitoring troublemakers.
Make regular visits to troublemaking patients. Ask the guardian to make sure the patient takes medication.
They followed up on Junjae too, regularly contacting his father to see how he was getting on. Junjae recorded one of these calls.
这个啊，就交流正常的还是正常的交流啊？那快尽快啊！好。哦。
Did you continue to take the medicine all that time?
Yes.
How long was that?
From April, maybe after I was released until August. To tell the truth, taking medicine make me feel like my brain was quite a mess.
Did you ever try and stop taking the medicine?
I couldn't do this when I was in hospital. The nurses, if you didn't want to take the medicine, they were like this.
Force you?
And even I was released, my father, because the policemen, they would go to my home and check it. So I have to take it.
During one of these police checkups, Junjae got scared they would force him back into hospital.
Most times, the policemen, they wear plain clothes, but I don't know why this time they drove a police car to my home. To tell the truth, I was quite frightened about this. And I planned that maybe I should leave China as soon as possible.
3 days later, he made his move.
On August 16th early morning, I told my parents that I'd like to go back to my university in Beijing to take some clothes and some baggage. But in fact, I went to Shenzhen and then I went to Hong Kong. I bought my plane tickets. And fortunately, on August 18th early morning, I arrived in Auckland.
So you didn't get to say goodbye to your parents or your friends?
No.
On his way to New Zealand, Junjie started posting about his ordeal in the psychiatric hospital. He says within minutes of his arrival, he received a call.
Just maybe 2 minutes passed and my father and the policeman in China, they called me.
Junjie told us the police threatened him. He gave us the recording.
第一，你越发的多，你的家人就受苦受难的越多。你坚持你的言论自由，你认为你在新西兰没有办法你想错了，一定有办法你。
They asked me to go back to China. My father asked me to delete everything I post and go back to China.
We spoke to Junjie after his move to New Zealand. He told us that the police were threatening his family in an attempt to silence him.
我的母亲就曾经多次给我发短信，或者说给我打电话。喂，妈妈。她在电话中告诉我，在我刚刚抵达新西兰后，我的家人就被公安带走了。
他们到底对你们做了什么了？
我一直认为，我的所作所为与任何人都没有关系，对我的家人，我也真的希望他们能够平安。但我真的是感到非常的愤怒，为什么中共他要搞这种连坐法？为什么要让我的家人他来承担一样的代价？
Junjie and his family had been thrown into turmoil. It was clear what role the police played, but to what extent were the doctors complicit? I'm on my way to meet a colleague. She's gone undercover to line up calls with psychiatrists in China to understand why doctors are working with police to detain protesters like Junjie for psychiatric treatment.
患者记录出现异常，好大夫医生助理评估后。
Using an online doctor platform called Good Doctor, we're targeting doctors working at the hospitals we know are involved with forced hospitalizations by police. We've made appointments with their psychiatrists.
你好，是医生吗？
To avoid suspicion, we've invented a nephew and explained to the doctors that he's been hospitalized for posting anti-government comments online.
你们那边的医院有没有遇到这个情况呢？就是这些有警察送到，然后把病人送到你们的医院里面治疗的呢？
有。
The doctor confirmed that posting politically sensitive comments online is seen as troublemaking.
因为他这种，比如网上发一些言论，如果是涉及到刑事立案的程度，那可能一个医院要有诊断，就是这个孩子到底是什么病。精神科有一个入院的形式叫肇事肇祸，比如他在外面持刀伤人，这是一种肇事肇祸的行为。好，那公安认为他在网上的不当评论可能也涉嫌这种扰乱社会秩序之类的，性质应该是一样的。
I was shocked to hear the psychiatrist admit that posting anti-government comments was grounds for admission to his hospital. We then spoke to a doctor from Junjie's hospital to ask why police are involved in checking up on patients accused of troublemaking.
他们从社会治安的角度去吧，你是一个症状记录的，然后公安可能要到家里关心一下，你下次出去要服药哦，你不服药，等一下再出去违反社会或者违法了。
In Junjie's case, he says that the police did check up on him, and that is why he felt that he had to leave the country for good.
Yes, some daily surveillance or some sort of monitoring, sometimes also quite intense.
Yeah, it's very invasive.
Speaking with my colleague and hearing from the Chinese psychiatrist yesterday was really the final puzzle piece that was missing for me in this journey. He confirmed that, yes, doctors are working with police in China to detain people in psychiatric units for troublemaking, especially if this trouble is linked to anything political. While victims like Lee can take the hospitals and police involved to court, they face many obstacles. After appealing the verdict on his case, Lee receives their decision by post.
现在马上打给他看一下，就是驳回上诉，维持原裁定。 整个的裁定过程基本上都是胡说八道的。我们经常能听到我们的领导人在说那个依法治国，然后我们就认为我们平时遇到违法的事情，我们是不是可以依法维权呢？那我们做梦也想不到被他关到精神病院里面去，所以说就会慢慢的越来越感受到一种绝望。
Lee's case is unusual. I'm looking at the official website for court decisions. We found another 112 people prepared to take the authorities to court. They also claimed they'd been illegally detained in psychiatric hospitals. More than 40% of these were linked to protests against the authorities. Only 2 won their case. But the site is censored. 5 other cases we'd investigated are not in the database. China's mental health law was meant to stop this abuse. But it seems that troublemakers are still silenced in psychiatric hospitals. For those brave enough to seek justice, the legal system seems stacked against them.
What I have learned from the people that I have spoken to is that they want justice, accountability, and transparency from a system that is perpetuating a culture of self-censorship, obedience, and discrimination against independent thought.
觉得这里边最关键的是，如果没有了民间力量的博弈，那个人的权利和自主权就可以被剥夺至今，而且都是为了你好。
If you could go back in time, would you not protest?
If I could go back to 2022, maybe I will not protest because my whole life was changed. It's extremely difficult for me to forgive these people who hurt me, but I just want justice. The police, the hospital staff, and the government, they hurt me. I cannot forgive the party, but I can forgive the person inside. I do hope that maybe in the future, China could change.
In 2012, China introduced a new mental health law that was meant to clamp down on this practice. What has happened since then?
We found 144 separate cases between the years of 2015 and 2021, which showed unequivocally that the political persecution of political prisoners, putting them into psychiatric detention, is still carrying on nonetheless, even after this mental health law was introduced. But this is just a snapshot of the full picture. It's not 144 cases, it's probably thousands, if not tens of thousands of people being put into psychiatric detention. All across China, you can see that I think it occurred in 21 provinces, municipalities, and regions. So psychiatric detentions are still alive and well.
In China, the security services actually run their own psychiatric hospitals, as you just said, the Ankang system, where they can put essentially anyone they want. Most of the cases you looked at weren't actually in these facilities. They were in ostensibly legitimate ones. So how do dissidents end up there nonetheless.
Police or government agents, they want to send CCP critics to these psychiatric hospitals, but it's easier for them to do it through civil commitment, not criminal commitment, because under criminal commitment, under the criminal procedure law, they need to have authorization from via a judicial review. Eventually, the case has to go to a judge. So we think that they are probably more likely using the civil commitment route, which means they just take the person to the hospital via whether it's bribery or whether it's coercion or whether it's just the hospital being complicit with the police. They take this patient in as a civil case of compulsory treatment.
And most of the cases you look at in this report weren't actually of activists, but petitioners, people with a very specific grievance they're trying to take to a higher level of government. Why is it that you think petitioners seem to be especially targeted by the system?
Generally, they're from the sort of very poor countryside, either villages or small towns or counties. They don't really have much resource or many supporters, so they're much easier targets. So, for example, if you have a high-profile human rights lawyer, when they're targeted off, the friends come out and can tweet and get international community concerned about their fate. But by and far, the majority of petitioners don't have access or knowledge about this system, so they can simply be disappeared.
This is anti-war activist Denis Hamidulin. This is what he looks like after 9 days in a mental hospital. In today's Russia, no good reason is needed to put an inconvenient activist in a mental institution. The practice has become increasingly common for dissenting citizens in Russia since the war began. Denis Hamidulin, detained for anti-war slogans on Red Square on April 28, 2024. Hamidulin was taken from custody to a psychiatric hospital, where he was injected with psychotropic drugs. Victoria Petrova is an activist sent for forced treatment after being arrested for an anti-war post online.
2 requests. 1, not to start a war with Ukraine under any circumstances. And 2, to withdraw the Russian military groups assembled near the border of Ukraine and Belarus.
Through her lawyer, the girl reported abuse and torture by the staff of St. Petersburg Psychiatric Hospital No. 3. She was beaten, humiliated, tied to a bed, injected with tranquilizers, after which she could not speak for 2 days. Yakut shaman Alexander Gabyshev is perhaps the most renowned victim of Russia's punitive psychiatry. Gabyshev traveled on foot to Moscow to perform a ritual to exorcise President Vladimir Putin. In response, a court placed the shaman in compulsory treatment. Since 2021, Gabyshev has been institutionalized in psychiatric facilities, which are more akin to prisons than hospitals. And the list goes on. The independent media outlet Agentstvo noted a 5-fold increase in political convictions sent to compulsory psychiatric treatment in 2023 alone. The attorney, Alexei Pryanishnikov, has been fighting for Alexander Gabyshev's freedom for over 3.5 years. Basically, anyone who showed emotion inappropriately in a conversation with police officers, and that's it, you're sent away. And now, especially in the beginning of the year and in the past year, in 2023, they've already gone to work at scale. That is, there is practically not a single month when, a couple of people convicted on political charges, especially with this military censorship, would not go to a mental hospital. How do political activists end up in mental hospitals? And why may this become a popular method for the Putin regime to combat dissent? I've been humiliated, insulted, threatened. Since the moment when I went to Red Square, I had to go there 3 times to realize that I can talk openly and say everything I'm thinking about. Activist Denis Hamidulin was detained for anti-war slogans. On April 28, a court arrested him for 14 days under administrative charges on disobeying police and discrediting the Russian army. He was then transferred from a detention center to a mental hospital for 8 days. There, Hamidulin was injected with psychotropic drugs that made it difficult for him to stand, walk, or even hold a pen. And then I decided that I'm going to fight to the end, like I've been fighting all my life. I'm a patriot of my country. I believe in people. I believe in justice. I believe that one day Russia will be free. This is the last video that Denis has published on his YouTube channel. On May 21st, he was released from the special detention center, but the activist has stopped maintaining his social networks, and he hasn't been in contact with journalists. Activist Victoria Petrova was locked up in a St. Petersburg mental hospital in October 2023. In December of that year, a court sent her to compulsory treatment. Here's how her lawyer describes this so-called treatment.
She was restrained to the bed by her hands and feet and injected with medication that left her almost unable to speak or complain for 2 days. While Victoria was tied up, her clothes were thrown over her face, seemingly to make fun of her helplessness.
On May 28th, an appeal was scheduled, but the hearing was postponed to July 19th. Petrova admits she would prefer a prison term, as that would at least have a clear end date. Haloperidol is an antipsychotic medicine which is used to treat various mental disorders, such as schizophrenia and chronic psychosis. It can also be used to control severe behavioral problems in people with mental disorders. In healthy people, it causes muscle lethargy, stiffness, and hand tremors, reduces one's attention span, and, when taken over a long period of time, it can lead to apathy and a depressed mood. In 2021, the shaman from Yakutsk was also subjected to treatment with the neuroleptic haloperidol, which caused severe side effects. Gabyshev even needed to have an ambulance called for him during a court session due to dizziness and limb tremors. According to his lawyer, he is no longer given these harsh drugs. Gabyshev left Yakutsk on his campaign to oust Putin in March 2019. The initiative was picked up by dozens of Russians who joined him along the way. He ended up walking almost 3,000 kilometers. In September of 2019, he became the subject of a criminal investigation for his alleged calls to extremism. In October 2021, a court ordered Gabyshev to undergo compulsory psychiatric treatment. 3 detention centers and 3 mental hospitals in 3.5 years, with no clear indication of treatment. Gabyshev is now in a specialized hospital in the city of Ussurisk. In May, a court refused for the 6th time to transfer him to a more lenient mode of treatment, to a general hospital. Although even psychiatrists insist on the transfer, the prosecutor and the judge completely ignore the doctor's conclusions. Pryanishnikov believes that the Russian authorities are actually afraid of the ritual that the shaman might perform.
I
was trying to explain it to myself. Well, I think they must have been scared of the rallies that were taking place as he was making his way through the east of Russia. But no, then all their further action showed me, in general, the situation in the country told me that no, it wasn't that. They were scared. Look, Navalny was also a media personality. He had large-scale support, a big audience, all that. This is a problem that the Russian authorities have been able to deal with for a long time. That is, they know how to deal with it. But here, they're afraid of his supernatural abilities, and this fascination, especially during Sergei Shoigu's tenure in the Ministry of Defense. Fascination with these shamanic rituals for the success of the army. This Dapchun Karol, who calls himself the supreme shaman of Russia, and I know for a fact that it's Karol who is against Gabyshev being free.
I am Olga Suvorova from Krasnoyarsk. Behind my back is the entrance of the Krasnoyarsk Psychiatric Hospital, where I spent more than 20 days by court order. I believe it was an act of punitive psychiatry.
In all court cases in Russia, a person must undergo a psychological and psychiatric examination before they can be found to be insane. However, in political cases, psychiatrists often employ vague and sometimes absurd formulations in their conclusions. Instead of providing medical diagnoses, they may label the accused's political views as a delusional disorder. That's the conclusion doctors came to, based on the results of an outpatient psychiatric evaluation of Krasnoyarsk human rights activist Olga Suvorova.
They believe I have a personality disorder because I have been active since my school years. I apologize for the repetition, but that's what it says. I have also taken an active civic role in the life of the city and the region, which is not typical for the average person. This is why they think I have a personality disorder.
She was detained on the 16th of May, right in the doctor's office, and taken for a forensic psychiatric examination in a mental institution. Coincidentally, this happened 2 days before the establishment of the Krasnoyarsk branch of Yekaterina Donsova's party, Rassvet, or Dawn, which Suvorova was supposed to head.
I landed at the airport in Krasnoyarsk. I told them my name. I flew from a meeting with Yekaterina Dontsova, and I was met by police officers in plain clothes. And not in plain clothes.
In November 2023, journalist and former Rzhev City Duma member Yekaterina Dontsova announced plans to run for president of Russia. She campaigned for an end to the Russian-Ukrainian war, for democratic reforms, the release of political prisoners, particularly Alexei Navalny, and the restoration of relations with the outside world. Dontsova's campaign was accompanied by pressure from security forces and slander from pro-Kremlin media. As a result, in January 2024, she was denied registration for the elections. Dontsova then announced the creation of Rassvet.
On the one hand, it's funny, but on the other hand, it's scary. What if we institutionalize any socially active person to check whether he or she is normal?
Doctors have also deemed the actions of Ingvar Garlamov, a former volunteer at Navalny's headquarters and an advocate for the rights of orphans from Novokuznetsk, the result of a mental disorder. Putin's regime broke its teeth on me anyway. I want his jaw to fall off too. This is one of those medical reports that you can laugh at. That's 85% of that report. Instead of coming to medical conclusions, they're issuing political statements. And what's more, it was written that he planned more and more protests year after year. Navalny was mentioned again, as always. And this, apparently, led him to some delusional ideas, some ideas of reformism, and so on. They're very fond of that, by the way. Gorlanov began his path as an activist from the age of 18 when the authorities denied him housing and the apartment he was entitled to as an orphan. Gorlanov then began taking to the streets, picketing and pitching tents outside the Novokuznetsk City Hall and waiting for Mayor Sergei Kuznetsov. Eventually, he managed to convince the authorities to give him an apartment. That, however, took several years. Gorlanov has been in a Novokuznetsk psychiatric hospital since February of this year. This is his second hospitalization for political reasons. He was first placed in a mental hospital back in December 2019. Before that, Gorlanov had come out to the building of the presidential administration in Moscow, picketing in support of political prisoners. And there he was detained by police officers who had eyeballed him and come to the conclusion that he had come from Novokuznetsk with some kind of appeal to the president. He must be some sort of fool, they thought. The doctors decided that Gorlanov was a danger to himself and others, and kept him in a hospital for a month. After that, police officers began calling the psychiatric hospital's orderlies on a regular basis when he was detained at street rallies in Novokuznetsk. And that's how this flywheel of psychiatry was launched against him. If you're sent to a psychiatric hospital once, then that reasoning starts to mean something to the authorities. That means you'll end up there more than once. Gorlanov is actively treated with psychotropic drugs, which he himself confirms. And, according to his lawyer, after being placed in a mental hospital, the activist started having memory lapses. During his last detention in February, Gorlanov was also involuntarily hospitalized in the Novokuznetsk Psychiatric Hospital for 6 months. While he was at the hospital, the court also ordered him to undergo compulsory treatment in criminal cases for inciting hate and insulting a police officer. If a person is placed in compulsory treatment by court order, they can only get out of the mental hospital after a formal reevaluation. These are conducted every 6 months in the mental hospital. They can also be requested on the initiative of the defense, the patient personally, or through an appeal against a court order. In all cases, the chances of success are very slim. In our cases, in both Garlanov's and Shaman Gabushev's cases, our request for a second psychological and psychiatric examination has never been granted, even though we ask for it every time. Priyanishnikov believes that doctors are again being pressured by the authorities in the case. They whisper in the ear of the psychiatrist or the chief doctor, who was grabbed by the FSB for stealing some paint when he was repairing the hospital. They have their hooks in him and say, "This is what you'll do. Do you like this?" He says, "Yes, sir." He calls over one of the doctors. The doctor says, "Sure, it's fine. That's what we're going to do." And that's it. That's where their subjective findings put the man away for a long time. Another way to put pressure on a political activist in a mental hospital is to prohibit him from communicating with his defense lawyers, or even sending complaints to government agencies and courts. Doctors often restrict their patients' communication. That is, sometimes they forbid visits, sometimes they forbid calls. Further, one has the right to appeal the court's decision. The doctors act contrary to the established duties in the law on psychiatric care, which provide for a person to correspond with state bodies, with the courts, in particular, with the prosecutor's office. This is directly stated in the law on psychiatric care. This is not some kind of speculation or conjecture on my part. They denied him the right, contrary to these rules.
When I was watching your film, I was just struck by the amount of trauma that you experienced and betrayal, not only from your family life, some abuse from your father, and then husband abuse, and then abuse from the system. And it's almost like you had nowhere to run that was safe, So can you share a little bit about your story? Because it's a pretty long film to sit through, and it's very traumatic, to watch it. Can you just give, in a nutshell, kind of a little bit about your story, about what happened, and what brought you to the mental health care system?
Sure. So my story, the film literally just chronicles my experience, kind of coming to this point where I had never experienced this before, but where I was being coerced and threatened by a psychiatrist for the first time in my life. I had never experienced this before, and it was quite bizarre, and I thought I would definitely have protection from this behavior, which was very aggressive. And, I thought this can't be legal. This can't be right. And, I looked for protection in Jamaica, and realized that, and from prior experiences of mistreatment, I realized that this is not a country that is going to offer me any kind of justice or legal recourse or protection from what this psychiatrist was doing. So I knew at that point, leave and make a refugee claim in another country, because there is no escape from this. So really, the story just chronicles literally that. It chronicles how I ended up in front of this psychiatrist who was threatening me, me trying to find help from all kinds of different sources, me fleeing the country and finally coming to Canada, and then having to navigate the whole refugee system, which was not, I would say, tailored to persons who were escaping the form of persecution that I was escaping. So right. That's literally what the story and the film is about.
Yeah. So in the film, I liked it when you said that what you're experiencing, you heard that first word that was persecution. And I think that was the word. And someone told you that, the lawyer said, this is persecution. And you were like, oh, wow. It, like the light bulbs went off. Yes, this is what was happening to me. It was persecution. But you also used the word oppression. So can you define the word oppression and maybe persecution too, and just talk about how the mental health care system oppressed and persecuted you?
So persecution is really a legal term used in refugee law. And I thought it was a pretty weird term because I had only heard of it in the Bible, you know, like the early Paul and the apostles fleeing persecution and stuff like that. So I'd never heard it in a legal context like that. I thought that was very strange, but it really is very specific. Persecution in refugee law refers to very severe forms of human rights abuses. So a great rule of thumb are the 3 L's: life, liberty, and limb. So if somebody's threatening your life, somebody's threatening to lock you up, take away your liberty, or someone's threatening physical harm. So that's really the principle that guides what is persecution. So I had to learn that because I knew nothing about refugee law. I just knew that it was, you know, refugees are escaping human rights abuses. So that's what I'm doing. But looking at that, and especially the 3 L's, life, liberty, and limb, I knew that this doctor was trying to take away my liberty. I knew that this doctor was going to harm me and the child I was carrying. So that's my limb. And these side effects, actually, even the psychiatrist who's treating me here in Canada said that these are potentially life-threatening. So I thought, yeah, that basically covers it. Oppression, I would say, definitely in my experience of psychiatric drugs, particularly antipsychotics. Antipsychotics, besides all of the physiological issues that they cause, the tardive dyskinesia, the motor control issues, and things like that, they can cause serious, severe depression, to the point of even suicidal depression. And I definitely experienced that in my experience of antipsychotics. And I can't think of anything worse or more oppressive than somebody forcing drugs on you that would cause suicidal depression, and yet they're doing that in the name of mental health. So I would say that's the oppression form of psychiatry.
Yeah, and I posted the film a few days ago to try to get our audience to watch it before you came on, and I don't want to give the film away, obviously, but can you just specifically say what the psychiatrist was trying to do?
Sure. So when I went in there, I was only there to get a refill on my prescription. And my father, because I was going through a lot of different changes. My husband had left me alone with my child. We had just gotten married. I was experiencing trouble at work, trouble with my family. So my father kind of had this false idea that a psychiatrist is someone that you can talk to about the issues in your home. So he kind of started just, laying out his heart and saying, oh my gosh, she's not getting on with her mother, and she just got married and her husband's left, and now we have debt. So he was actually there just to, I know that in his mind, he was just like, I'm going to talk to the psychiatrist and tell him what's going on at home. It's so stressful. And the response, he was not prepared for either. I was not prepared for, he was not prepared for. This psychiatrist is not somebody that you can unload all your emotional burdens to. She was like, basically, oh, what you're telling me is this is a troublemaker. This is a troublemaker. And she, like, my father even told her, like, just off the cuff, because he just knows it's about me, like, oh, she hates the side effects of the drugs. She's really had a hard time with them and she hates them. Right. So he just just laid that out. And the psychiatrist literally said, oh, yeah, well, I'm going to drug you with olanzapine, diazepam, lamictal, and a higher dosage of quetiapine. And it was so aggressive.
Yeah.
I say in the film, I literally thought she was joking because, for someone to say she's afraid of the drugs, so therefore you're going to threaten them. Well, are you afraid of them? Well, I'm going to drug you with this. So
yeah, and wait, tell them this is all on a recording.
Yes.
She's not making this up. Like, this is recorded.
Yes. This is all recorded, and stuff, which really helped in my case. But so I was really, like, nobody had ever done that to me before. I had never faced coercive psychiatry yet. Certainly, I was coerced by my family to take different medications and stuff, but I could always like kind of say, no, this is great. I don't like this. But to have an authority there saying, I'm going to drug you with this, and in a threatening, in a very threatening manner, that was the first time that was happening. And, it's funny. So let's see, how could I describe this? Okay, basically, I knew there was no arguing with this person. I was not going to start sticking up for myself. I was not going to start making excuses or whatever, because I saw that this person was dead serious, right?
Yeah.
At first, I thought she was joking, but then she told my father, listen, the first thing she did was said, do you need hospitalization, Roxanne? Right? In that manner, with the whole, with the gesticulations and stuff. And I knew that, the most important thing is to stay calm, because if you go, no, oh my gosh, then they're totally going to use that against you to say, see, she's crazy. Let's restrain her. She's going off. So I just stayed calm, and I said, no, I don't think I need hospitalization, and I would never go to Ward 21 anyway. And then she started really making her case. Like, she stopped speaking to me, started speaking directly to my father only, saying, this is the thing. If she goes to another hospital, they can't force her to take the drugs. But at Ward 21, we can make her take those drugs, right? And so I realized at that point, don't argue with this woman. Don't argue with it, because she was so, she was very adversarial. Yeah. Right. So that's when I took my phone out and started recording, because I realized that this, don't try. If anything, get help afterwards. Record this and see if you can get some legal help. Right. So I had her on recording, but then she was like, just talking to my father, listen, this is what she needs. She needs to go to hospital now because this, that, and whatever. And that's what basically happened. No, the funny thing is that my father has, in the past, he's kind of understood where I stood with medication, with regards to the side effects and the weight gain and the somnolence and everything like that. So he was never a proponent of, yes, let's force medication on her. But at the same time, he did not want to argue with her either, because the Jamaican Professional Society, him as a lawyer, she as a doctor, you don't get on person's bad sides, because you're going to end up rubbing shoulders with them. This is a potential client, even. You don't want to get on this person's bad side. So, I wished he would have stood up for me and said, no, we're definitely not doing that. That's crazy. But instead, he didn't agree with her, but he was kind of like, I would almost say slightly afraid of her as well.
Yeah, I liked what he said. He was like, what about diet? What about exercise? What about something else? He was offering alternatives, and she was like, no, she needs more drugs,
Exactly. He was even saying, well, how come she didn't have an episode when she was pregnant the last time? And he's gently trying to get us out of the situation, because he didn't realize the situation he now put us in, right? By unloading to this doctor all my problems, right? So he's trying to get us out of the situation, but she is like, no, not at this point. This can't work. Talking doesn't work. She needs drugs now. And so that's basically what happened. And truthfully, according to the Mental Health Act in Jamaica, she could have actually acted on her own. She could have just said, I don't care what you're saying. I'm taking her in. But again, she also did not want to offend this prominent lawyer, right? So she starts saying, she starts backtracking. She starts backpedaling, because when my father is not going along with it and constantly kind of trying to make excuses as to why this is not going to work, she backpedals, and she's like, having bipolar doesn't take away all your rights, and and Roxanne is not psychotic, so I can't do anything. And she literally admits there on the recording that I'm not sick. She admits that I'm not suicidal, that I'm not psychotic, that I'm not a danger to anyone. And she also says that I seem to be taking good care of my son, right? But yet goes back after that and saying, she still needs admission. And then argues with my father, and she's not willing to sign. She's not willing to sign, As I literally had to just, interject. I'm going to talk to a lawyer. That's all I'm going to do. Is just talk to a lawyer. And kind of give her, it was just divine intervention, really. I was very close to being hospitalized at that point, which would have been devastating because I was 13 weeks pregnant at the time.
Surveillance state.
Good evening. Ever since Tsarist days, Russian political dissenters have feared their political views could land them in the infamous Arctic labor camps. But what increasingly haunts the Soviet political dissident today is the threat of being declared insane and sent to a mental hospital. While the Soviet authorities strenuously deny it, the dissident movement continues to claim that thousands of people who disagree with Kremlin policy are confined to mental hospitals when their only disease is dissent. There have been numerous reports reaching the West of dissidents being confined to special hospitals for the criminally insane, like this one in Leningrad, or to regular mental hospitals. Last Thursday, the World Psychiatric Association formally censured the Soviet Union. Meeting in Honolulu, delegates from 63 countries narrowly passed a resolution condemning what it called the systematic abuse of psychiatry for political purposes. They also voted to set up an international committee to investigate psychiatric abuse. Soviet delegates called the charges preposterous, saying there wasn't a single case of a healthy person being placed in a mental hospital. Tonight, we look behind the scenes of Soviet psychiatry and at these charges of systematic abuse. Jim?
Robin, a case well known here in the West is that of Leonid Plush, a Ukrainian dissident and leading Soviet mathematician. Plush was arrested in 1972 after he joined a human rights defense group and wrote an open letter protesting a political trial in Moscow. After a year in prison, he was diagnosed as suffering from sluggish schizophrenia and reformist delusions, and he was committed to a special psychiatric hospital. He was released in 1976 and allowed to leave the country. He now lives in Paris. Plush told of what happened at that hospital in an interview last year conducted by an independent filmmaker and made available to us by public station WXXI, Rochester, New York.
The first day was perhaps the most terrible day for me, when I saw people cramped, twisted up from the pain, from medication. Their tongues lolled out, their eyes bulged from their sockets, their bodies were contorted. Well, the doctors perhaps all know that it is necessary, along with the drugs that are given to the inmates, it is necessary to add correctors, which prevent the physical effects of these drugs, to alleviate these cramps, these pains. Yes, but especially in these first days, they are not given. And truly, many people during these first days immediately come to understand that they must surrender their will, that they must not protest. It is a terrible thing. I was almost always put among the most aggressively disturbed. And you know, well, for a healthy person to see the suffering of the truly insane, suffering from the medication, suffering from the illness, it is awful. And I would not say that it is less awful than the drug treatment itself. I was not given drugs in the beginning, but I was given them later. Powerful drugs in very heavy doses. And it was during a visit with my wife that I first experienced convulsions. My body was totally contorted. It was very upsetting because my son was there, my wife. I did not want them to see my suffering, and I asked that the visit be terminated. But the worst was afterwards, when I was convulsed for 3 hours from these drugs. Well, in the beginning, I was given haloperidol. This is a very powerful drug. Several Soviet psychiatrists have since told me that with my diagnosis, that is, sluggish schizophrenia, heavy doses are not necessary. I was given very heavy doses. Then I was given insulin. I was given very heavy doses of insulin. They wanted to bring me into shock. Although with my diagnosis, insulin was also unnecessary. Nevertheless, I was never brought to the point of shock. This was only because my wife protested this treatment so vehemently. Then I was also given tryptazine. Many patients are given sulfazine, sulfur. This is formally also considered a treatment, but in truth, it is always a method of torture, designed to break one's will to defend oneself. It induces a very high temperature. The immediate area of the injection becomes very sore. Welts appear all over the body from this injection that are very painful. The person cannot find a place for himself. He cannot lie down, nor walk, nor sit. Yes, and another thing is that during sessions with the doctors, they constantly perpetrate mental torture upon you by ridiculing your views, your friends. For example, my doctor constantly ridiculed the letters I received from my wife and children. She hinted that my wife was also insane, that my younger son was insane, schizophrenic, only because my wife wrote that my younger son was fascinated with the sciences. Doctors did not tell me this directly, that is, that I should declare myself to be insane, but they were constantly bringing me around to it. See, you criticize Soviet rule, that is, you're sick. In fact, they demanded this from me all the time. Furthermore, a couple of times they proposed to me things to which I couldn't possibly agree. After several other well-known dissidents broke down and began to recant, to tell lies about themselves and their friends, it was proposed that I should make such a declaration, officially recanting my views in writing. The doctor told me that this would attest to the fact that I was psychologically rehabilitated. I refused. Then a second time it was proposed to me to write an ideological autobiography. How I became anti-Soviet. This was the first point. And second, how I came to understand my mistakes. Well, I refused.
That was the patient's view. Now for that of a Soviet doctor. Marina Vakonskaya was a practicing psychiatrist in Leningrad hospitals for 13 years before emigrating to Britain in 1975. Her 11-year-old son, Misha, and her mother were not permitted to leave. Dr. Vakonskaya is visiting the United States after attending the Honolulu Psychiatric Convention last week. Dr. Vakonskaya, was the treatment that Leonard Push has just described, is that treatment typical for political prisoners?
Yes, it's typical for political prisoners, and he described it very correctly. But I can't say about another kind of treatment. It's wet sheets. They put a patient in 9 wet sheets together for some hours. And when these sheets are going to be dry, it's real torture. Sometimes it's hours, sometimes it can be a day. And it's real torture. But everything was Plush said, it was all right.
Including the drug treatments?
That's right.
Including the particular drugs that he...
That's right.
Are they drugs that are used in the Soviet Union for people who are really mentally ill?
Yes, all of them.
They are valid drugs for the treatment of mental illness?
That's right.
I see. But they are not valid for treating people who are not mentally ill?
Not at all.
Can those drugs harm people who are mentally healthy?
Yes, they can. They can break liver, they can't make harm to a heart, they can't make people who are healthy tiring very quickly, as Plush. Plush is he is tired very quickly. He can't have a conversation for a very long time. He must go to sleep.
I see. Now, the diagnosis that they gave him, sluggish schizophrenia, is that a real disease?
It depends which school you believe. In Russia, we have two schools of psychiatry, Leningrad School of Psychiatry and Moscow. But now Moscow School of Psychiatry dominates in all USSR. And this school is who believes in this schizophrenia, sluggish schizophrenia. We can say it's slow schizophrenia or creeping schizophrenia. It's the same.
Slow or creeping schizophrenia.
Yes.
Yes. What about the ailments, reformist messianism or reformist delusions that were also ascribed to him? Are they real illnesses?
Yes, sometimes, but very, very rare. It can be syndrome of real illness, but it's very rare. Most of people who diagnosed with this disease, they are sane, and they put in mental hospital only because of their real political views or religious beliefs.
I see.
And it's nothing to do with delusion.
Do psychiatrists in the Soviet Union who you worked with treating these patients genuinely believe them to be ill?
I'm sure not at all. I can tell you about on my own experience. In my hospital were 100 doctors. And when I knew about sane men in my hospital, I began to tell everyone. And most of them didn't want to know. They knew before, but they didn't want to know because they didn't want to make a trouble for themselves.
So, but when did you discover that they were treating or putting in the hospital sane people?
In the end of 1973.
After you've been working for many years?
For 10 years.
And you'd never encountered a sane person
Never.
before?
Never. And even before in my hospital were sane people, but I didn't know about them. And first sane man whom I met in my hospital, he wasn't in my department, he was another one. And I knew about him only by chance.
So when you discovered it, you went around telling other doctors and they didn't want to know about it, so then what did you do?
Then I began to visit him every day and to bring him books, cigarettes, toothbrush, soap, very simple things. And I smuggled out some documents, his autobiography, his self-portrait, he is a painter. And yes.
Are none of these cases of political dissidents genuine psychiatric cases? None of them?
It's not a question, I think. I don't think we need to discuss who is sane, who is mentally ill. We need to discuss who needs to be in mental hospital and who doesn't. It's first. And second, like in every population, like in every part of society, some people may be mentally ill, but it's nothing to do with abuse of psychiatry for political purposes.
I understand that, but let me just ask the question because it would clear up perhaps some confusion. Are there political dissidents who are in mental hospitals in the Soviet Union who should be in mental hospitals?
I don't think so. I met 13 people who were former patients who were out of hospital by that time, and I became friend of them, and I know exactly all of them were sane. And I met in my hospital 6 people, and they were sane forever, and they didn't need any treatment, and I'm absolutely sure. And a lot of my friends told me about other sane people whom they met in mental hospitals, and they are sane too.
Can this treatment make sane people mentally ill?
I don't think medical treatment can make sane people mentally ill, but such a situation in which these people to put in mental hospital without ends, they don't know how long they will be there. Maybe years, maybe months, maybe 10 years, maybe all their life, maybe forever. This, of course, this can
break the mind.
Yes, and they can make them depressed. Of course, it can.
Well, thank you. Jim?
Authoritative information on the full scope of the abuse of psychiatry for political purposes in the Soviet Union is very hard to come by. One person who has devoted much time and energy in trying to put together a factual overview of the situation is writer Ludmila Thorne. She has written extensively on the subject. Ms. Thorne, how standard of practice is this, committing political dissidents to mental hospitals, based on your research?
Well, unfortunately, at the present time, the practice of incarcerating sane human beings in mental homes is increasing. It is not decreasing. For example, right during World War II and after World War II, we know of 3 of these special psychiatric prison hospitals. Today, we know of 15, at least 15, if not more.
Of course, there are not just political dissidents in these special psychiatric hospitals, right?
No, it's true. These are special hospitals created for the criminally insane. But even during Stalin's time, for example, people were not treated in these hospitals the way they're treated now. For example, during Stalin's time, it was almost a relief, instead of being shot, to be put into a mental home. Also, you were not given these terrible drugs as you are now, Haldol, haloperidol, stalazine, etc. And now, for example, when a dissident is arrested, he is almost immediately threatened with psychiatric incarceration.
Have you got any estimate as to how many dissidents are now in some kind of mental institution in the Soviet Union?
Well, of course, as you realize, the Soviet government does not give statistics of that sort at all. So what we have tried to do, all of us who are concerned with the problem, is try to piece together information which is available.
Sure.
For example, every dissident that I've interviewed who has been in a psychiatric prison hospital, I've always asked him, how many people were there altogether, A? B, how many of those were politicals at the time when you were there? And by talking to many, many people, we have, for example, come together to the decision that approximately 10 to 14% of all of the inmates of the so-called prison hospitals are politicals. So by following this up, we have come, for example, to the figure that at the present time, at any one moment, there are at least 1,000 persons in the Soviet Union today who are incarcerated for the religious, political, and national beliefs. Now, this is, a minimum number. Vladimir Bukovsky, for example, told me he thinks at least 1,500, not 200. Leonid Plush told me he thinks at least 1,500. But just the minimum figure we've been using is 1,000 people today.
Well, let me ask you a similar question to the one that Robin just asked the doctor there. Are you sure of these, whether it's 1,000, 1,500, whatever the figure is, are you sure that all those dissidents are in fact sane and have been committed solely because of their political activity?
You see, this is a very important question, and I think Dr. Bakhanskaya touched on it. The point is that even if some of these 1,000 people are not totally sane, they should not be given neuroleptic drugs, which make the tongues loll out and go into torture. They should not be forced to recant. They should not be forced to give testimony against their friends. All of this pressure should not be even say 999 of them are slightly, eccentric or mentally ill. They should not be succumbed to this sort of practice. I live in New York and I see many cookie people on the street, but they're not injected with drugs. And all these people are persecuted solely for expressing their views, for reading a certain book. Like Bukovsky had 2 copies of Milo Vangelis' book, and so he spent 15 months in a psychiatric prison hospital. The point is not whether sane and insane. The point is, should they be there and should they be mistreated?
And your point is that even if they did have some kind of mental problem, they would not be treated the way they have been treated.
I don't think so.
Yeah.
They should not be.
All right, as a general rule, what kind of dissidents are those that do go this psychiatric route? Is it any particular type?
Yes. Well, we have sort of a number of certain categories of people who are more prone to be incarcerated in mental homes. First among these, of course, are the so-called dissidents. By a dissident, I mean a person who has continually taken part in the human rights movement in the Soviet Union, who has consistently written something on its behalf or demonstrated, like Bukovsky, like Mr. Plush, like Gorbanevskaya, many others. That's the first category. The second primary category are what we call nationalists, Ukrainians, Balts, who try to secure great autonomy for the various nationalities. The third prominent category are religious believers. Right now, for example, the Baptists and the Pentecostalists are under a great deal of pressure. And we know many cases, for example, a person who believes in God is told that your illness, your belief in God is a pathological illness, or we will beat your religion out of you. We know many cases now of people who try to cross the border and leave the Soviet Union because legally they can't leave. So many people, at least they can't if they're not Jewish, say. Many people try to cross the border and are caught, wind up in insane asylums. So there are certain categories of people who systematically are incarcerated.
I see. Thank you. Robin?
There are several ways Soviet citizens have chosen to fight back against this system, but each has its own dangers. Dr. Voikonskaya chose to emigrate, but her son and mother remained behind, unable to follow her. Dr. Semyon Glucksmann chose to stay and fight. He challenged the official diagnosis of insanity, which led to the incarceration of a famous Soviet general who had fought for human rights. Dr. Glucksmann is now in the labor camp number 36 at Perm in the Ural Mountains. But the efforts continue on both inside and outside the Soviet Union. Inside Russia, there's a group which calls itself a working commission to investigate psychiatric abuses. They publish appeals through the underground press, Samizdat. Right now, they're trying to free Yosif Terelya, who is incarcerated in a small regional psychiatric hospital in the Ukraine. This is the actual Samizdat appeal for his release, smuggled into the West. But how effective, really, are these efforts? Jim?
Well, Dr. Voikonskaya, let me just ask you, is it getting anywhere? The action that you took while you were there, the action you've taken since, and all the other activities that Robin just laid out, is it having any effect at all?
I didn't understand the question.
Is the activity of protesting against these practices having any effect?
Yes, of course, it's very effective. Vladimir Bukovsky was released only because after long campaign in the West. Leonid Plush was released after very long campaign, especially in France, in the West. Even me now in the West only because of campaign in England. Of course, it's very helpful. Everything is very helpful.
You mentioned earlier the role of the doctors, the psychiatrists in the Soviet Union in this whole program. Why do not more of them speak out or just flat refuse to judge a sane person insane?
Oh, it's a very complicated question. It's really very difficult to speak out, to be inside of Russia. I know how it's dangerous and how it's really terrible and frightening, I must say. And most of them want to live very quiet life if they can. They want a piece of bread with butter if they can. They want small flat and little bit of furniture, which they can get. And because of this, they keep quiet.
But isn't it not true, though, that the doctors themselves could stop it? I mean, without the doctors, this program would have to be stopped, would it not?
And if doctors can get a job only from the government, and they are very independent of the government and KGB as well, it's very difficult really to speak out. But some of doctors, of course, doing this with pleasure, if to say. If it is the top Soviet psychiatrist, as Professor Znizhnevsky, Professor Nadjarov, they know exactly what they are doing and for what reasons.
Mm-hmm. What do you think, how effective do you think this new international committee to monitor psychiatric abuse that was set up at this Honolulu meeting, do you think that's going to do any good?
Of course, it's going to be very, of course, Soviet doctors can't read it in Soviet newspapers. It never will be published. But they can listen to the Voice of America and the BBC. and they will know about what happened in Honolulu. And I can imagine a very young psychiatrist who is working in a mental prison hospital and who can think and can say, not really no, but somehow can stop treatment and quite secretly and privately to say, patient, look, you are sane, and bring him some food or book. And I can imagine a doctor who is sitting in outpatient department and depend of whom are many patients, and who can say no to the KGB because of this, because they don't want to make their names public in the West.
I see. Robin?
Do the ordinary people in the Soviet Union know that there are people who are incarcerated in mental hospitals who are political dissidents?
Of course, most of people now listen, I told you, the Western radio, and they know about this. But of course, most of them don't want. Like me, first 10 years, I was a psychiatrist in Soviet Union. I listened to the BBC, and I knew about this practice. But I never came across, and I didn't believe it.
You didn't believe it?
Yes.
No. Would most Soviet citizens who go along with the regime or support the regime more or less, would they tend to think, oh well, if that person is described as insane and he's a political dissident, he probably is insane? Would that be the tendency of the ordinary public to believe that?
I don't think so. I mean, I haven't been to the Soviet Union since a child, but I don't think so, because I think most people, I mean, at least they're honest with themselves. I think most of us have the same criteria for sanity, insanity. I mean, we may have friends who are slightly eccentric, but I just don't believe that people are that different in the Soviet Union inside as we are here. I can't believe that.
But would ordinary citizens think, oh well, if that person's a dissident, he must be insane?
I don't think so, I must
You don't
say.
think so? No. But you genuinely believe that the efforts in the West will actually, to talk about this and to have it better known, will actually help?
Oh, it's
Why, in your opinion, did some of the Western delegates to the conference in Honolulu not support the resolution? I believe, for instance, the Scandinavians did not support it. Why was that, do you think?
I really understand them. They think in Honolulu, in WPA, they can see Soviet psychiatrists and they can talk to them. And if they will make this resolution, Soviet psychiatrists walk out. But
so they'll lose their contacts with the Soviet psychiatrists.
That's right, but it's not true.
Well, we'll have to end it there. Thank you both very much for coming. It was nice to see you. Good night, Jim.
Night, Robin.
That's all for tonight. We'll be back tomorrow night. And other news permitting, our story, which we intended to have tonight, but the arrangements changed in Washington, will be The Senate Investigates Burt Lance. I'm Robert McNeil. Good night.